Okay, got it. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the March 20th Business Services meeting. We are going to start off, I believe we have citizen comments first.
We do. We have Speaker Terry McCann-Mahalski on funding for special education.
And we have our normal statement.
So during public comment period, members of the public body who wish to speak are asked to first state their name and the community in which they reside. Each individual will have up to 3 minutes to address the board on a topic of their choosing. Once the speaker has reached the 3-minute time limit, a timer will sound and the speaker will be asked to finish their comment. We ask all individuals who address the board to do so with respect and civility toward others. Please note that personnel matters are sensitive and confidential. We also want to inform our speakers that all regular, special, and committee meetings are live streamed and available for viewing at any time on the district's YouTube channel. Personal information should be considered before making a statement that will be recorded and made public. While the board will not respond to today's public comment during this meeting, we are committed to listening to you and help support our work for the district and on behalf of our students, staff, families, and community members. Thank you. So.
Special education. Wow, that was loud. Do you need me to start over? Okay. And comments made by a board member at the March 10th meeting and his discomfort about voting to approve funds for special education programs without evidence that they are effective. And I understand that his intention was not expressed with the way that it came out. First, though, I want to talk about how those words have a huge impact, coming in the same conversation with the word burden and how those programs bring a burden to the schools that they are in, and add some context about the national discussions that are going on and how families with disabilities have often been ridiculed, othered, and mistreated in the general population. Added to this, we can just take a moment to reflect on the words of Senator Lang from Ohio, which kind of sum it up well. He said, "We know for a fact that it costs more to teach a student with severe disabilities. I'm going to make up a number. Let's say that cost is $50,000 a year, compared to a student who comes from a family with a loving mom and a loving dad who put education at a high level. It costs a lot less to educate those students." These comments are terrible, and they're harmful to students with disabilities and their families, but they're also harmful to the whole of education because they have now created two separate groups of students. And sure, perhaps the comments were spoken unintentionally, but they do a lot of harm. Just like the harm that comes every time a student is denied services in this district by being told they are too smart for an IEP. And yes, this does happen. It sends a message about what staff think about special education students and what they think about the other students. But more to the point, I want to talk about what we're saying about special education and that it is too expensive to fund, that the students themselves are not worth the expense. But when we think about what we're actually funding in school, we're not thinking necessarily about the expenses that we are making for other things that are beyond just regular education. We are willing to fund AP courses. We are willing to fund dual credit courses and extracurricular activity and other advanced courses without doing a lot of questioning about whether they are worth it. And I do realize I am out of time. My last thing to say is, why are we willing to say that we are valuing that sort of expense and not the expense for special education? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and that was our only comment for, commenter for this evening. So first up would be Mr.
We're going to move on to item 2A on our agenda, access.
Board, thank you. We look forward to tonight's conversation. This has been an ongoing conversation. We have a number of people here tonight with us to have this conversation. So we'll get it kicked off. This is really about the access program review, growth and location. And I want to be very clear. This is about location. This is not about ending the access program. That is not this conversation at all. It's never been a part of our conversation. It is about location, specifically in this conversation, mainly around Anderson Elementary and the access program that is at Anderson Elementary. With that, we'll start with our core values. I don't know, are we clicking?
I apologize, Dr. Gordon, it's not working.
Okay. There we go. These three core values you'll see represented throughout the entire presentation. The belonging, the perseverance, and achievement, all three will show themselves throughout this presentation. Our strategic priorities of effective collaboration, instructional coherence, and a culture of dignity as well. You will continue to see these three strategic priorities laid out throughout this presentation tonight. The purpose of tonight is to provide the board and community the background on access, bigger picture of elementary space needs, the short-term viability of options for the Anderson Access Program, considerations for long-term location viability of the access program. The non-purpose tonight is to make a decision on the location of the Anderson Elementary Access Program. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Laurel O'Brien, Executive Director of Student Services, to talk to us a little bit about the legal requirement overview.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for taking the time to really listen and think about this. I wanted to make sure that we first grounded ourselves in the laws in special education and related services for all of our students through federal and state mandates. And so just really kind of coming from a very high level, simple perspective of it's mostly driven by the Individuals with Disability Education Act, or IDEA as we commonly refer to it, and then there's state law that accompanies that. And through that, we really look for our students to have a free, appropriate public education, all students, and that includes that specially designed instruction that allows them to do two things, generally two things, which is access the general education curriculum and also make sure that they're making progress on their goals and objectives. So we accomplish this, and we'll talk about this in access itself, what that means, through their students' least restrictive environment. This is one case law to refer to because it was the most recent United States Supreme Court case law that really addressed the standard for free appropriate public education, the Andrew F. case that's commonly referred to, and it took the standard, what was called the Raleigh standard, which was from the 1980s, and just really updated and caused school districts to look at raising the bar, so to speak, so that no longer was it sufficient to say it's just enough if a student has a foundational level of educational services and if the student is making some progress, but rather we need through the IEP process and through the Andrew F. standard to be able to say that a student is making, or we are able to reasonably calculate that a student will make measurable progress on goals and objectives. And that should be in light of the student's total circumstances in their least restrictive environment. So this really helps lead us into why access, where are we going with that sort of a program. And then this slide just helps us to think through what does that mean. Under IDEA, we have a continuum of services, and we're required to have that continuum of services. Honestly, I think in St. Charles in District 303, we're We're very fortunate that we have really what I would call a robust continuum of services, and we do have educators, and the board has really supported that to make sure that we're addressing those needs for our students. And in this case, our access program falls where you see that highlight on specially designed instruction outside of the homeschool. So in other words, as an IEP team steps through and thinks about, well, what is a least restrictive environment for each student, then that team is determining that, back to that reasonably calculated standard, that a student would make progress, but for this case, in this reason, most students would need to be moved out of their home attendance area school so that we can have those locations where we can design the classroom just to be the right environment with the right specialized instruction to really help each student make that progress. Of course, for a few students, they might remain in their home school because it is one of the schools where one of the 3 schools where we have access, but it is very much part of that determination. I always like to think about the continuum of services in 2 ways under IDEA. One is from a systems perspective. We're always thinking through how do we make sure that we will be able to ensure that our students, as they come to us with many different needs, some of them are very high achieving academically and have those social emotional education needs, and some of them are really struggling academically but are just they're doing a great job with the social emotional needs. So there's this variance that we want to make sure we address. And for our students with autism, we absolutely are thinking about that complexity all the time and looking at their needs. And as a team, when the team decides, the IEP team, that a student is going to be in access, which is that specially designed instruction outside of the homeschool, then we look for those opportunities there, and it's really a beautiful thing, for the student to be able to have access, not only to general education, but to peers. And when we're embedded in our elementary schools, we can do that. We also can be very choosy in terms of how and where will a student make the most progress. For example, it might be math. This might be the best place where we know the student will make progress and really shine. So we look for those opportunities to use the skills from access and then implement those skills in that general education setting with those peers. At times, the team will decide either once a year or sometimes more frequently that the student might be ready for more access to general education, and they make those changes and make those moves throughout the school year. At times, an IEP team will decide with the parents at the table that this really isn't sufficient, and the least restrictive environment for that child is actually what we would consider more restrictive on our continuum. And it might be in a public or a private day placement, which we'll talk more about later. But I think it's important just to know that across our recent history in the past few years, we've had about 2 to 4 students each year where an IEP team has decided that they could access more general education. That even starts in early childhood when we're looking for students to be in those blended classroom environments, so that's fantastic. And then, of course, K through 5, or that they might need, same number, about 2 to 4 students every year over the last 3 years, that they need a higher level or a more restrictive level of services. So there's ebb and flow with that across the board.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Karen Pratt, our Director of Student Services. Karen works very closely with our access program, with our staff and parents as well. So she has been an instrumental on this team as we've been working through this process. So Karen, you want to talk about access program?
Thanks, Paul, and good
Absolutely.
evening, everybody. Like Paul said, my name is Karen Pratt, Assistant Director for Student Services. I work mainly at the elementary level. One of my goals is also supporting our access program. The first slide that I want to share tonight is just overall about the access program. So access is actually an acronym. Do we have the, sorry. Thank you. Which is up on the screen. And this acronym and program name was developed 5 years ago through a committee that worked to develop a vision and mission statement for our program. The vision statement is also up on our screen, and really many of the fundamental pieces of our vision statement have not changed since this was developed 5 years ago. Of note, however, at the time of the statement, we were servicing and supporting students in grades kindergarten through 5th grade. Most recently this school year, we have opened up a level of programming in 6th grade in the middle school as our students continue to age so that we can continue to. So our newest location, Thompson Middle School, supports our oldest students. Next year, we will continue to roll up by another grade to support students at both 6th and 7th grade in middle school. Our program comes with several different components that are planned intentionally for throughout our programming. First, our teachers teach to 2 sets of educational standards within our curriculum. We have the Common Core state standards that all of our students in D303 are taught toward. There is also a set of standards called the essential elements of the Common Core that are a set of standards reserved for students who are most impacted by their disability, who need almost like a priority standard of the Common Core state standards in order to continue to grow and make progress. So within our program, our teachers teach typically 2 grade levels and also teach to 2 sets of standards within both grade levels. Within our classrooms, we engage in what's called a structured classroom environment. That is kind of the best practice model for supporting and teaching students with autism within the research and the literature. And so we call that the structured classroom environment, and we'll talk a little bit more later about what those classrooms look like with the space setup. As Laurel touched on, general education participation is critically important for our students, and we can only do that with our students being here in D303. And that's something that we are consistently planning for and having conversations about and thinking about those opportunities for each and every student to access education alongside their peers. For some students, that's entering morning meeting in their grade level classroom for 15 minutes and then going back to the Access classroom to receive the supports that they need. For some students, that can be an entire literacy block and then joining the Access classroom for math. Those decisions are made individually at the IEP table, and they change consistently throughout the year as students' needs grow and change. We also embed sensorimotor, emotional regulation, and communication supports within the classroom. Some of our students are considered total communicators, and what that means is that they utilize gestures, possibly AAC or voice output devices. They'll use vocalizations and sometimes even sign language to communicate. So we honor all modes of communication and make sure that we respond appropriately to whatever mode of communication that students provide to us. And that takes time for our teachers to learn and respond to, and is also part of the specially designed instruction that we provide, that we are really in tune with how our students are communicating their needs. This is a little bit about our program within D303. As Laurel noted, this is a program outside of the student's home school, more historically known as an instructional program, meaning students receive the majority of their core instruction in this classroom throughout the day. And of course, this is an IEP team decision. The program was started in the year 2017-2018 as one kindergarten classroom at Fearson Creek Elementary School. The first cohort was 7 students in that kindergarten classroom, and since, as I stated earlier, we have grown the program into 7th grade. More and more students continue to be eligible for services under the category or the classification of autism. We also support students with additional classifications under other health impairment, intellectual disability, multiple disabilities, or developmental delay. But I can say that 95% or more of our students are qualified under autism, but we do have a different array as well. Our program goal, as we've kind of already touched on, is providing those inclusive opportunities for each and every student as they're able and as we can provide. So we really work to increase these opportunities alongside parents for each and every student, and really find importance in our students participating alongside grade level peers. We try to be as inclusive as possible for each student, and as we are able to move students to a lesser level of support within our district, that really is a huge celebration for us. It's also a celebration that many of our students will require services and supports in our classrooms for some years. And really within that, we can still have them in our general education schools, in our elementary schools, and providing those opportunities on a flexible basis. This is the current makeup of our program as we sit right now for the 24-25 school year. We have 3 locations, Munhall, Fox Ridge, and Anderson. Both Munhall and Fox Ridge are new locations for us this year, and at Anderson we are in our 2nd year with the Access program at Anderson. Of note, within our classroom grade levels, we do not offer a K-5 continuum of services for the students within each of our locations. We'll talk a little bit later about the sizes of our cohorts from incoming kindergarten through current 5th grade, and you will see that those cohort sizes are vastly different. The largest cohort yet anticipated coming from early childhood is around 15 students. So as our numbers of students in each grade level grow, we have to think intentionally about where we place classrooms and programs, and with a long-term goal of providing that K-5 experience. Within our classrooms, for our staffing needs, we provide 1 special education teacher for our classrooms. Our current range of students in the classrooms are between 6 students and 9 students. Ideally, we try and roster our classrooms around 7 to 8 students so that we can provide that intentional and specially designed instruction for each and every student. We also try to staff paraprofessionals and teachers at approximately a 2-to-1 ratio, meaning with the teacher and the paraprofessionals, we have approximately 2 students for every 1 staff member. That can go up or down, with some of our students requiring less adult support throughout their day and some requiring more. Approximately, however, we try and be around 2-to-1 to establish and maintain the work that we try to do with students in our program. For each of our buildings, it also comes with an increase in the amount of speech-language therapy, social work, and occupational therapy full-time equivalents that we need to provide for each and every building. We really think of this as about 0.2 FTE, or about 1 day per week per classroom. It is slightly higher than that as we consider kind of all of the special factors or higher class sizes, but we really try to plan intentionally for about 1 day per week per classroom. Now that could be split up across the week, and we do try and do that, but we do, provide more staffing in our buildings with our classrooms. In terms of our staff responsibilities, the reason that we really work to staff at these ratios are for the responsibilities on the right. So our students do require an increased level of supervision compared to their general education peers for safety, both within the school and outside of the building. Some of our students really are developing their safety awareness, meaning we need to be ready to respond to elopements or behaviors that might impact safety. And that's both within and outside of our schools. We also support students with self-care routines, such as toileting, hygiene routines, and feeding, and we work to build independence within these skills, but first building that independence takes more staff at the beginning. We also work to embed our supports for communication, sensory, and behavioral needs, both within our classrooms and within the school environment. And we provide instruction across multiple grade levels. So having 2 grade levels and 2 sets of standards requires more hands on deck to really just provide that intensive instruction. And of course, with general education opportunities, some of our students will require that adult support in general education, so we staff to provide that.
Board, I'd just pause here for a second. If you have any questions about kind of the overall access program that Karen was speaking about, or IDEA that Laurel was speaking about, if there are any questions in this section for either of them.
I don't want to derail this discussion, and but my question is more for you, Dr. Warden. At some point within the next, week or 2, can we get some type of feedback from you in terms of the recent executive order, if it's signed and goes through related to the Department of Education, because that directly has impact on this type of effort?
Absolutely. As you indicated, it occurred today to begin the dismantling of that. For us, one of the biggest aspects are what occurs with the funding. As Mr. Attaway will talk about a little bit more about it, although D303 does not receive significant federal dollars, every dollar that we do impacts us for within special education here in D303. I believe it's roughly $2.5 million that comes to us from IDEA. So it would have a significant impact within our district if those funds were reduced. But absolutely, I can give you a much broader conversation in the next couple of weeks, especially as we start to untangle what does this mean from just the department potentially closing down. What does that look like for a district like ours?
Yeah, because what has been reported as kind of the dust settles, it would be helpful.
We absolutely will do that for you. Thank you.
I have a couple questions, and I think this is the right time to ask them. When do students exit? You said that do you find that it's better for the student to stay in the building that houses the access program, or do they tend to go back to their home schools?
For our most recent students who we've moved to a less restrictive setting, they have all moved back to their home schools. Now, there are some individual circumstances where that may be considered, especially if that was of value to the family.
So the family gets to talk through that. Okay, I wondered about that. What's your feeling about housing K-5 for access, a K-5 program? Is that the best?
Can we pause on that one? Because we're gonna address that specifically, Mrs. McCabe, if you're okay.
I'm good with that.
Okay.
And then, not to derail the conversation, I think having a mission statement, it's very powerful. Do we have that for all our special ed programs?
We have a mission statement for student services that is a mission statement, a broad statement for all of the special education programs, and certainly can share that or can give it to you at another time. I'm not sure what would be best, but we would agree with you that it's very important, and it's really powerful that it connects to our strategic plan as well. So that's part of the work that we'll talk about towards the end too, that we want to keep going forward.
Okay, thank you.
I just have a quick question regarding if students remained in the school where they were receiving services after they've exited the program. Transportation would be an issue, and how would that be attended to?
So typically, as Karen referred to, we really work with the family at the IEP table when that is a consideration as to whether or not students are ready to access more of that general education setting with perhaps still a resource model of special education services. Where would that be best? And actually, quite frankly, that sense of belonging and the culture of dignity just comes into play as such a big part of that, because at times the student has developed relationships within that building where access is that maybe have been going on for 2 or 3 years, or even in 1 year there has been strong impact. At other times, parents will advocate for the fact that their student has friends in the neighborhood, siblings at their neighborhood school, and the importance of that piece. So it's weighed very carefully so that then when it comes to transportation, we then look to whether or not, if the student is staying, whether or not we can continue to support that transportation, and we work directly with the transportation department. We often have to tell parents that that's something we need to check on, or I know from conversations with Karen about these very things that she will reach out ahead of time, just anticipating that conversation to see what that looks like if we're able to continue that transportation. So it's really case by case that we step through that and figure out and problem solve around it.
In that scenario, do we make the families do an intra-district transfer, or does that just get handled as part of the IEP?
So part of the conversation happens at the IEP table, and there have also been, again, as Laurel said, it is really, really individualized and case by case, where the level of support that we're recommending and the family's desire to stay at the school may require the inter-district transfer level as well, or process as well.
Okay, as I figure this button out, let's jump into some national and then our local data. Karen, that's what, Laurel? No, we're pointing at each other. You literally just pointed
Karen
at
and I
each
have
other.
been, Karen and I have been fighting over this slide. We both really like it. Yes, we think it's just really impactful to the bigger picture, so it's actually because we both want to take it. This is just so important to the bigger conversation for us to look at the numbers and statistically think about what's happening for us at a national level. When we were considering, and we'll talk about that later, Karen will talk about those class sizes and what that looks like historically and where we're going. But when we were thinking about this program in District 303 and thinking about the need for an instructional level of services, we were at about 1 in 54 students in 2016, or 54, I should say children in 2016 diagnosed with autism across the nation. These are numbers that come from CDC, and they come from a process that's a scientific process that is used to consistently and continuously monitor across states in our country. They determine this based on children who are 8 years old, and so it is always followed as kids turn 8 in these sites and come up with these numbers. As you can see at this point in time, when we're at 1 in 36, and also of significance, while it's 4 times more likely for boys than girls, we also found that in very recent years, it's no longer more likely in one race than another, or I should say there's less difference there. So we have lots of kids across all racial and ethnic groups experiencing or having the diagnosis of autism and having needs that are really impacting them educationally because of that.
Can you clarify your statement about at 8 years old?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the way that the CDC and ADDM process works is that they hone in on a student, I keep saying students because that's how I think of it, but it would be children who are turning 8 across the country who are diagnosed with autism. So it's really from that medical lens that this data is collected. And they use 8 years old because that is more likely a time when it's more evident as to whether or not a student, there I go again, sorry, I'm just going to keep using that word, would be diagnosed with autism. When children are younger, oftentimes the characteristics are more difficult to determine whether or not it's a true autism diagnosis. In the educational world, we use the term developmental delay because there are those characteristics that are there, but they're not sure, and oftentimes a medical expert would not use the diagnosis or the term of autism before 8. Some do, some don't, but that's why they use that number.
So let me ask you, because we do offer access, obviously, at kindergarten for sure. So is it a fair statement to say then that we have a much more robust program than for our students because we're actually starting to work with them on these things well before the certified diagnosis? You know.
Great question. And, oh, sorry, you were going to jump in. You might have to augment what I say, but the medical diagnoses and the educational eligibility under IDEA, we have 13 categories under IDEA where children can be eligible for special education services, and in Illinois, 14 because developmental delay is in Illinois as a category. So those students become eligible through that educational determination and that IEP process. That often does include an outside diagnosis. There are actually parents who bring that to the table. From time to time, the school district is actually a partner in doing that and in determining that. However, we have criteria, and it's very firm and strict criteria, and this is my school psychologist friend right here, that is used to determine whether or not it is autism or characteristics of autism which could fall under developmental delay or even other health impaired. Karen, would you add or?
Yes, so educationally, we think of it as a classification. So it's more like that, the idea of symptoms consistent with. So we have the medical or clinical criteria and then the educational criteria, which are very similar, but they're not the same. So sometimes students may have a clinical diagnosis and not qualify under autism educationally or vice versa.
Okay, so that answered my follow-up question to that would be, is it possible that we have more of that we have a larger educational diagnosis versus the actual clinical?
I think we haven't pulled that out of the statistics.
Okay.
Right now, I think that would be difficult to kind of tell.
Okay.
What we're going to share a little bit later really looks at prevalence kind of in Illinois for IEPs for the educational system and comparing kind of D303 to the state and looking at, kind of those percentages there.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, that was a great transition. So, so this table is really just digging into our data for students classified under the category of autism who receive support through special education, both here in D303 as well as in the state of Illinois. So the bottom bars with the percentages in the teens represents the percent of students in special education who are classified under the category of autism. So the D303 bars are green and the state are blue. And what we see from that is that the percentage of IEPs in D303 is slightly lower than the state, kind of across the years. And then the top numbers above the graph are the percentages of all students, either in D303 or in the state, who have a classification of autism. So thinking of students both within and not within special education, and what is the total percentage of students that we're really focusing on for these data. And, oh, that's fine. We can go to the next one. Thank you. So now we've talked a little bit about D303 as well as the state of Illinois. And so now we want to turn our attention really more toward the Access program specifically. So this table really outlines our program from the start in 2017-2018 through the current year. We're looking at the D303 total enrollment, as well as our enrollment of students with IEPs, those IEPs for autism, and then where students receive their services. So many of our students who are classified under the category of autism, and most of them receive their services within our general education classrooms for the majority of their day. We then have the D303 Access program, where we have a smaller number of students. And then, as Laurel discussed with the continuum of services earlier, we do have small numbers of students who participate outside of D303 through partnership with our Mid-Valley New Pathways program, which is similar to our Access program, or within private placement outside of the district. This slide represents the previous data visually. Of note with the bar graphs is just the increase in the number of students that we're servicing with one of these four models from 2017-2018 through the current school year. We see increases overall, and really the orange bar representing Access shows the growth of the number of students within the program that we're supporting at this level since the beginning of the program. Another note on this slide is when the program started in 2017-2018, we did move students back from our co-op to begin the program here in district, really with that value of including all of our students with autism within our programming here in D303. We do still maintain that partnership as another place on our continuum where we can service students, but that really is what the 0 represents from 2018, is when we brought the 7 students back into district. Here is the growth of our classrooms, again, from 2017-2018 through present. Like I stated earlier, you can see our 7 kindergarteners who started that year. The program started out at Fearson Creek and then stayed at Fearson Creek for the next 2 years exclusively. In 2020, a classroom was opened at Davis, and the program by that time had grown to 3rd grade. In 2023, we then moved 2 classrooms into Anderson, and we were working really within that K through 5 grade span at that time. For this year, we moved into the middle school for the first time and also moved out of Davis and Fearson and into Munhall and Fox Ridge, and also opened our first classroom at the middle school level. Next year, we do anticipate a significant number of students joining us from early childhood and into kindergarten, which is going to require us to consider opening up more classrooms to really meet the need of the growing cohort coming to us. Currently, we're expecting around 15 students within that class coming in. And then, as we're going to talk about later in the presentation, that then brings considerations for classrooms continuing at Munhall or opening up a classroom or a few classrooms at Corron.
Board, any questions on the overall data from the national to the local?
I do. Just to repeat what you said, we had students who were going to, I think, Mid-Valley, correct, before 2017, and then decided to bring all our kids, as many kids back to D303. So that was clear. And maybe it's my own feeble math brain here. What age are kids coming in? Because we're rolling up, and we're getting a lot of children. So are they if you're in early childhood, you begin that process of being identified to go into access, but it looks to me that we're not just rolling them from early childhood into kindergarten. Is that right?
Yes. The biggest growth in our program year over year, like you just said, is early childhood coming into kindergarten. We also do get a handful of referrals. Right now, we're kind of in consideration with 5 or 6 students, which I would also say is a consistent trend, that our younger grades are typically where teams in the homeschool are considering if another specialized level of instruction is necessary, and that typically would happen in 1st or 2nd grade. We then do have a number of move-ins every year, so students who move to St. Charles and have this level of need within their educational plan, and the way we support that plan here in D3 is through the Access program. Over the last 3 years, that has been between 1 and 6 students. Last year was our biggest intake of students, specifically in the summer. We had a lot of students move in with this level of support. We do also have a few students who move out. This year we've had 2 students move out. It's about 1 or 2 each year who move out of our district and no longer need our program.
So as a follow-up question, and having some experience, so 1st and 2nd grade is often when you're making those decisions. It's a very difficult time for both families, kids, classrooms, as you work through that whole process. Are our K-2 teachers, do we need to give them support or training as we go through, as children go through those classrooms of gen ed? Is that a piece that we are taking care of? Do we need to do more to make that transition?
I think our statistics speak to kind of that ongoing need, as there are more and more students in our general education program. We do want to talk about that a little later with our long-term kind of plan for access as well, but yes.
So one of the things that I heard, at Anderson is we did some specialized training, adapted PE, I think it was. Do we have opportunities like that for our instructors, throughout the district, or is that only if the program is at the school? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when our program opens up in a new elementary school, we do have kind of like that base layer of here's what you need to know as this program comes to the school. In full disclosure, because it's right at the start, it's really not enough, and we know that, and we're continually working to make that better. I think another thing I hear from our educators is that learning to work effectively with this population takes time over years. So we really work at that start of how do we best support our program as we move in, and then we plan and continue professional learning across the first few years and ongoing. So what that looks like is kind of your traditional staff meeting or stand-up, professional learning, as well as embedded coaching supports throughout kind of the move-in of the program. We have a variety of special education instructional support coaches and access program facilitators who can support that work with general education teachers, with other special education teachers, or with our art, music, and PE teachers as well.
Are there techniques in that? So obviously if we go back to the bar graph, right? We do have a number of kids that are in standard classroom. Is there anything that you guys need that would be beneficial for the rest of the district, not just the access program itself, but offering some of these courses like adapted PE to the rest of the district?
So it is definitely something that we're really looking at simultaneously, and it's building the capacity among all of our educators, and then building those really discrete skills that are even more, I guess, structured, for lack of a better way to say it, but some of the techniques that are really necessary for that smaller population of students. And doing that simultaneously takes a lot of thought, a lot of ongoing cycles in terms of what the professional learning needs to look like. We are having discussions with all of the learning and teaching team because we recognize that we have a lot of educators, teachers, and related service providers who are telling us, we want to do more, we want to know more, we have lots of students in our classroom with these needs, in general education classrooms. Help us do better, and we will. And so it's how we need to plan long-term to put together that in a more robust way so that we're doing both things simultaneously. We kind of can't give up one for the other, but we're doing both to keep lifting up those students.
Understood, right? It's a toolkit,
Yes.
right? And you're adding to that toolkit as we go. My ask, and this more broadly, not related to access, would be to think more about this and what our needs are from a budgetary perspective. Like, let's put first blush at it, because again, some of the things that I've heard from visiting, right, and talking to folks is those techniques are very valuable. I also talked to a number of other teachers who said, like, we'd love to be able to, like, we have a need. We know that there's things that can help us. How do we disseminate that? So that would be my ask for you guys to start looking at it again as we're planning long term.
Thank you.
Okay, our next section, we're going to dive into. Aaron will kick us off, and then Mr. Buxton will join the show.
All right, so thank you to the board members that came and visited our classrooms over the last couple weeks. It was really fun for you guys to meet the kids. And if we can go to the next slide. Just to speak to a little bit of what our classrooms look like. So we have 6 to 9 students in a classroom, and that sounds like a very small number. But our instructional areas take up that whole traditional classroom space. And so really what we provide within that setting, within that structured classroom, research-based setup, is an area for whole group instruction, having areas for small group instruction, having an area for one-on-one instruction with a teacher or paraprofessional, having an area designated for independent work where students engage in tasks on their own, depending on grade level, having a play or a break area. So similar to our kindergarten classrooms, there may be in an Access kindergarten classroom a play kitchen and an area for kids to play. And then also a sensory support area. So having either a swing or a crash pad or other sensory supports embedded within the classroom environment. And then within our larger building spaces, we work really closely with our building principals and building teams to think through intentionally all of the other space needs that we have. So like I said earlier, we do need that full-size classroom space. We then, because of the additional related services staff, do need additional office and instructional space for those professionals. Something that's critically important to our program is that we are also able to have a sensory space outside of the classroom. So some students really benefit from having that embedded in the classroom support, and then some students also need a space that's quiet and has the tools they need that's away from instruction. So really having that outside of the classroom is critically important for our students. Within the lunchroom, we do just need an additional table so students can move around as needed. Many of our students, most of our students, sit with their same grade peer. Some of the sensory equipment is also quite large, so we need to think about storage. And then we think really intentionally about our special transportation drop-off and pickup and where makes the most sense within kind of our building footprint for those buses to come and go.
Yeah, so I think this is a great time to remind the board that so far this presentation, we've been kind of learning a lot about the autism program, the Access program, but that we're not looking to change the Access program. Now we're entering into that conversation about space. just establish some of the space that's needed within the classroom and then some space within the greater building. And so now on the next few slides, I'll take a bigger look at space within our district and kind of start to zoom in closer into specifically talking about Anderson. So if you'll look here at this slide, we're going to see from that first year in which Access opened in 2017, 2018, we have grown in our overall enrollment by 382 students, and we're at over 5,000 for the first time in about 13 years for our overall enrollment. I kind of mentioned this last time at the board table, but what the graph on the right side of the slide is going to show is just registration and withdrawal of students by school since the very first day of school this year. And I think this just shows that our students are continuing to come to us in D303 throughout the fall, throughout the winter, throughout the spring. And you can see that each one of our schools, we're growing students at a greater rate than our students are leaving us, with the exception of a net zero at Wild Rose. But overall, you do see that just from the first day of school, our enrollment K through 5 has increased by 94 students. So what we're looking at here is our anticipated number of core sections for next school year. Here's where I want to just be very clear. These are projections. It's March. These numbers change significantly, and this may not be where we land ultimately, but I think it will give the board a snapshot of some things that we're considering for a short-term solution, knowing we need a long-term solution for locations of our Access program. So you can see by school the number of anticipated core sections. We do want that dedicated space for art, music, and STEM, which is why we're showing 3s in that second column. I want to be clear, in the spaces dedicated for programs, that is the current state. That's not part of the proposals or options for next year. I'm just showing the current state as of the 24-25 school year, and then you'll see total classrooms. Finally, when you add those columns up, you'll see anticipated rooms available. However, this can paint a little bit of a different picture than I want it to paint. I can assure you none of our schools have vacant rooms based on, and I'll show this on the next slide, each one of our schools' footprints looks quite a bit different when it comes to auxiliary space, office space, the flexibility with how they use space. And so what some of our buildings may need to do with an open or unused core classroom is use that space to put multiple specialists or staff members into that area to provide that small group instruction. And I think Anderson, if we start with Anderson, it'd be a good example of how Anderson uses their space. So from this chart, you'll see that they would have an open classroom, even with keeping 2 Access classrooms. However, one of the things I would need to note is Anderson currently uses multiple classrooms that are used for shared office space. In one of the classrooms, they have 5 staff members with some bookshelves and things to kind of partition and create visual barriers. But there are 5 staff members that use that classroom space to deliver small group instruction. And so those are things when we think about the efficacy of that space, how conducive that space is for focused instruction, student concentration, free from distraction, teachers having access to the resources and materials they need to do the work that they need to do, just something that is a compromise. This is just another way of looking at some of the other programs and services that we offer our students in D303, which is a huge celebration, but I'm also going to link it back to space. So we do offer the STEM program, and this is a robust science program for our students this year that has been wildly successful. That does take 11 of our classrooms offline because we know that we cannot compromise the integrity of that program by having it in an LRC or having it on a cart. That is not a viable option. We then look at our number of special education programs. You'll see the number 2 in parentheses because, as you saw in an earlier slide, with the projected enrollment, we could potentially go up to 8 Access classrooms. And so if that does come to fruition, we would be up to 12 classrooms in our elementary buildings being used for our special education programs. couple things about some of the other programs and services. AT Math in our minimum space standards, just like with OTPT and band orchestra, we have a minimum space standard of 500 square feet, shared space. Big celebration. There are some of our schools where the enrollment and number of students qualifying for AT Math in that building, a 500 square foot space can't suffice. So when you take that information and apply it to the previous slide, many of our schools end up using a full-size classroom to deliver the AT Math curriculum. OTPT, just as Karen and Laurel said earlier, it is ideal in a building that has that's housing access classrooms to have OTPT space outside of their classroom. And again, those are compromises that we have to make based on the different uses of the other classrooms. Band and orchestra, I think this is a great time to look at footprints like Corron, Belgraham, Norton Creek, where they have dedicated spaces in their actual blueprint that was carved out for band and orchestra, and it's in a perfect location in the building, and it works perfectly for the needs of that program, whereas some of our other buildings have to either do some cohabitation or use a classroom or share with like the art on the days the art teacher isn't there. We'll hopefully have, now those would be the 2 days that we have band, and we can put the band teacher in the art room. So again, these are just considerations that are made based on the overall layout of a building and how flexible that space is for principals and for teams. On the right side, you're going to see both a number of office or auxiliary spaces and then the overall square footage. So again, this is going to paint that picture when you look at some of our newer buildings that may have been constructed in a manner that looked more like school looked like in that more modern state. You're going to see more office spaces. You're going to see significantly more square footage. You're going to see in our 3 newest buildings, you have office spaces that are over 400 square feet that provides significant flexibility for how to use that space, where in some of our older buildings, a big office space is 260 square feet type of a thing. So this just shows how in a building footprint, the principal has to work with their teachers and teams if that office or auxiliary space isn't adequate, where they need to do some cohabitating and use a classroom space to do some of that small group work. So now let's zoom directly into Anderson and that idea of the short-term phase out of whether or not, what would be the impact of the access program maintaining its placement in Anderson. So on the left side of the graph, you'll see some space needs that we want to have available in our schools, and what might be some compromises that would be made at Anderson if the access program were to phase out over time, but stay in there for the 25-26 school year. So we'll kind of go need by compromise. So Anderson, with their lack of office and auxiliary spaces, they do need to have space in quality environments to have that small group instruction, especially in light of them being a multilingual collaborative TBE program, where we know they're going to need some dedicated space to deliver some of that Spanish instruction. And so what would be some compromises if a classroom or two was not available? Really looking at the LRC would be the predominant space in which small group areas would exist for that instruction to happen, or significantly more cohabitation within a classroom, and being more flexible with furniture as we're putting more adults into a classroom space to design that small group for 3-4 students at a time. There was the space need to have OTPT, have a dedicated space outside of the classroom. That would not be something that would be able to occur at Anderson. Having a dedicated space for art and music all the time, for every lesson that week, and in the footprint, in the plan, there is the probability, if not full likelihood, that there would be a day, 1 day per week, where one of those 2 courses would need to be on a cart. Finally, if you go back to the minimum space standards, we talked about the concept of those repurposed classrooms, those classrooms that are available should there be a grade level that needs to pop a 4th section or still live an anomaly in enrollment. Just keeping an eye on 2nd grade at Anderson, As of March 13th, they have 76 students. The cap for a 3-section grade level would be 81. And so would we need to make a compromise of saying, hey, you know, because that space is so critical, might we need to predetermine if that number gets toward the cap or gets toward that 82, 83? Are we kind of predetermining that we're going to cap that at 3 sections because that space would be needed to accommodate the classrooms for the access program? The faculty room that we want all of our buildings to have, it does serve multiple purposes at Anderson. We talked a little bit about this at the board table of they do have a space that we could use flexibly in kind of a phase-out process, but what would be the compromises of taking that room offline? That is also Anderson's space for their book room, where they're, you know, books that they're using for students, an eating space, and it's also where they have their copy machine. So again, taking that space offline would include additional compromises for that space. As Karen and Laurel spoke about earlier, with having a program in your building, sometimes that comes with additional speech language pathologists, it comes with additional social workers. In our minimum space standards, we talked about those roles having confidential spaces due to the testing and the types of conversations that they need to have. And it might compromise the ability because they would have more FTE within those roles that may not be able to hit those minimum space standards of that confidential space.
Board, any questions about space that Jared was speaking about?
There were a couple slides with asterisks.
Richmond.
Yep, I know what I'm talking, I know the slides you're referring to. Richmond had an asterisk on the square footage. The reason I put that in there, and this was several years ago, construction within their LRC to build pretty significant pull-out spaces there. So I just put an asterisk there because they did do some construction to their LRC footprint. It wasn't like office space designed into the original blueprint of the building. There was also an asterisk by Fearson Creek showing that it was 26 classrooms because we did also do some construction in their LRC to create an art room. So we really did create a 26 space to be able to accommodate those minimum space standards for this year.
Okay, let's jump into the program options. Karen, back to you.
Yep. All right, so we're now going to talk about 3 program options for the 25-26 school year for the Access program. Our first option would be to phase the program out of Anderson without the addition of a mobile, flexible, small group classroom space. And then with that plan, we would also phase classrooms into Corron Elementary School. Our second option would be to also do the phase out of Anderson with the addition of a mobile classroom for small group space, and then phase into Corron as well. Our third option that we're going to discuss would be the full program move to Corron, where we would take the 2 classrooms currently at Anderson and move them over to Corron. This graphic lays out the students in our classrooms currently and what the phase out would look like for both options 1 and 2 as we go through the years. So for this current school year in the second column, you can see our 2 classrooms at Anderson. Our first classroom has 2nd and 3rd graders with 9 students. That's our largest class roster within the program. And then our second classroom has 7 4th and 5th grade students in that space. For next school year, in order to facilitate a phase out and to think about space, we would condense the 3rd through 5th grade students into 1 classroom with a roster size between 10 and 12 students, depending on some of the movement within the continuum that we were discussing earlier. If those decisions were to be made, it would be between 10 and 12 students. We would then start a phase in at Corron, where we would welcome roughly 6 students into a kindergarten section within Corron. Into the 26-27 school year, we would matriculate our 4th and 5th grade students within that 1 classroom at Anderson, and then welcome another cohort of kindergartners into Corron. In 27-28, we would have our 5th grade students remaining at Anderson, We would think about any move-ins or referrals in fifth grade who could make use of the 7 to 8 spots within that classroom. And then we would welcome another cohort into Corron as well. By 28-29, we would be out of Anderson with 3 sections at Corron. And in this school year, it may be challenging to go K through 5 within the 3 sections, but over time, we would hope to roster and think intentionally about students moving in or out of the program to allow for that full K through 5 continuum across 3 sections at Corron Elementary School.
Karen, can I interrupt? Do we have concerns about that many students in that classroom at Anderson? Because, you know, having gone through those classrooms, right? And we have the swing in there, we have all the other stuff. To me, I have a concern that, you know, we're potentially going to see a degradation of services by putting that many kids in there.
Yes, so if we go to the next slide, that is one of the compromises that we did note for option 1, would be having more than kind of our preferred 7 to 8 students per classroom. The classroom model that I described within the research that we utilize to set up our classrooms within the program is really set up for no more than 10 students. So we could take a few more, but that would be one of the compromises. Now, I will say with this group of 3rd through 5th graders that if there is a group that could have a classroom this size, it would be this group. Would it be ideal? No. But with some flexibility and with thinking through intentionally other spaces in the building and ways that we could support students, I really do believe that for this cohort, for the 3rd through 5th graders, that we could make that work for this year. I would also have within that classroom, I would recommend that we keep the 2 current teachers and have them share the classroom space. What that would allow for is we could have kind of a main classroom teacher, and then we could have our second teacher really support that small group instruction within the classroom, or support co-teaching opportunities with general education as appropriate for our students in that way, or even small groups in other instructional spaces. So we would work with our teachers and with our team to really intentionally plan what that 2-teacher model could look like. And if there's any cohort of students that could really benefit and work with that, it would be this group.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? Is there a possibility, if this would be the plan, is there a possibility that we could talk to each family for those 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades and have them partner in terms of the decision? Because maybe they would prefer that their student go to one of our other sites.
Absolutely. So
Okay.
those could be those, for each and individualized conversations that we could have for students. But another compromise mentioned on our slide here is that our classrooms at Munhall don't have a lot of open seats either. So if we think about within this level of programming, other seats for our 3rd through 5th graders, because our younger cohorts of students are so large, that would be pretty limited, that Munhall option. But as available, we certainly could consider that.
Have parents, are you ready for us to ask more? Okay.
On that one option?
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
So have our parents gone over to Corron? Have we given them an opportunity to see what the building looks like?
No, most have not seen Corron. A few have, but that hasn't been part of our plan.
Is that a possibility if a
We
parent?
could
wanted to?
absolutely.
And so if the 2 current teachers stay there, at some point, one will move, correct? So I think families, we know that families love their teachers, and that will be very important to them. So that should be part of, this year will be the year that teacher might move, right?
Yeah, that absolutely would be true, and I would anticipate in that 26-27 school year, when we have the 4th and 5th grade 9-student section, that would be the time where our second teacher would move.
The other thing I wondered about, how important is it in the program? One of the things I love that you've talked about with Access is the idea of being with peers. So if we're phasing out and changing the program, there'll be the loss of kids who are not with the with the kids that would be, some would be, well, wait, no, they stay together, and then as the fifth graders leave. Okay, never mind. My question, I was concerned that you were breaking the program up, but you would be holding the kids together, and the new kids would go. Okay, thanks.
Oh, did we? I think we covered. Okay, so then option 2. So the movement of students in classrooms would be similar in option 1 and option 2. And then this slide really goes into the strengths of option 2, which would be the addition of a mobile unit for some of that small group flexible space. Some of the strengths, and I didn't mention this for option 1, but it's the same strength, is really this would honor our commitment to our families to have a continuous experience from where they are currently in Anderson grade levels through their 5th grade year. That, of course, fosters a sense of belonging and community, relationships with other students, and relationships with other families within the Anderson community. Another note in terms of strengths for both options is that there is a high percentage of students within our Access program who are also multilingual learners. And so while we bring the collaborative TBE model to Anderson, many of our students within the Access program could also benefit from that embedded layer of support that wasn't there previously. And with option 2, we would also have that additional space for staff and small group instructional spaces.
And so therefore, when you look at the compromises of option 2, they're going to look very similar to the compromises from option 1. Again, the classroom size, Anderson having only one class, being a standalone class, impact that can have on scheduling with related services. You know, we have more classrooms spread out across more buildings. And then again, that flexibility for IEP teams to recommend 3rd through 5th grade students into the Access program. One of the compromises that was almost put over to a strength with this option is if we put a mobile classroom online, it would not be a mobile use for like a core classroom. The classroom or the mobile would be used for small group instructional spaces, and we have a lot of flexibility for how we could design that mobile to meet a variety of different layouts to provide multiple different small group areas for that instruction to occur.
In an option 2 option, would we still be compromising with art on a cart and going through that process? Would we still?
We would, because this would not be an additional classroom space.
Okay, so we, in both option 1 and 2, we would still be losing the specials in there.
1 day a week, yep.
Okay.
Could we not use the mobile, though, for art and music? For that 1 day a week, for example?
If we design if we design that to create a 750 square foot space, that could be an option.
Okay.
So as Karen and Jared referenced, we are looking at this transitional plan to phase out access potentially from Anderson into Corron. And as part of that, we are looking at a mobile classroom potentially at Anderson. So as they alluded, we would be potentially using this as a staff work space as well as small group instructional spaces. And that sweet spot that we're looking at would be something around 1,600 to 2,000 square foot. So equivalent to 2 classrooms approximately. And put it in perspective, our current mobile at Davis is just over 6,500 square foot. So this proposal would be a much smaller footprint. So what we're doing over the next couple of weeks, I've partnered with Wold Architects, and they're looking into what that feasibility is, what those current building code requirements would be on a site like this. And additionally, we are doing a survey of the entire property to understand where we have the ability to work within our existing property to place something like this in the future.
Can I ask a mobile question? Is there any way to do it without children ever having to be in it?
Well, I can chime in here. Really looking at what we need to support the 2 programs within the building next year is that small group pull-out space that would be beneficial. Providing additional space for staff is critical, but really the staff needs that space to have those pull-out services and small group instructional spaces.
I'm just thinking of Anderson's So the lounge could be out, I know I'm getting in the weeds, so I don't want to.
No, I think it's a good question. I just think what I would add, with Anderson qualifying for Title I status, that comes with additional staff. With Anderson having, in options 1 and 2, an access program, that comes with additional staff. With Anderson having a multilingual collaborative TBE, that comes with additional staff. So I think the common denominator is there's going to need to be space for educators to deliver that small group instruction. And to me, that is really the spirit of why we're adding a mobile to this option, is it's going to create some of that flexible space to do that small group work.
So then our third option would reflect our full program move to Corron. And so really through the years here, we have our 2 classrooms at Anderson that for next school year, we would move to Corron. We would then think intentionally about any 3rd through 5th grade referrals that we could place in these classrooms. We would have more flexibility with the number of seats in each classroom. And then, like in the other option, we would welcome a cohort of kindergarten into Corron. Through the years, we would then phase our oldest students into middle school while also welcoming new students into Corron with the ultimate goal of achieving that K through 5 continuum of grades within our 3 classrooms at Corron. Some of the strengths of this option is that students who are currently at Anderson would have those increased spaces for small group, for OT, just really those needs that come with the program for staff as well. Corron staff within the Access program would have collaborative partners between the 3 classrooms, and we would have increased flexibility for IEP teams to make recommendations. And we would also have an Access classroom at the on the west side of the district. Currently, we're at Foxridge and Munhall, which are very much on our east side.
And some of the compromises of option 3 is when we're looking at those students currently being served at Anderson as they roll up to 3rd through 5th graders, they would be moving to a new school. And for some of those students in that cohort, they've already moved to a new elementary school each year of their elementary years. We also would have some students transitioning to a new school for 5th grade, then to a new school for middle school. So again, multiple transitions in a really short period of time. Another compromise is just looking at Corron, our biggest building with 27 classrooms with significant auxiliary space comparative, but they would start the next school year with 3 access classrooms, possibly compromising space for other students based on the fact that there's still a lot of time for enrollment to change. Looks good at this point, but anytime we're adding 3 access classrooms to a building that already has 1 Strive classroom, we're putting multiple classrooms offline at that site.
So before we transition, so I want to talk a little bit about, something we've seen. We saw I don't want to call it the hockey stick graph, right? But the bar graphs of increasing enrollment in this. I'm assuming that we've chosen Corron for a reason, right? And if we do need to, having to move these kids it's not great. It's pretty awful. But when we've talked about this and we know this population is increasing, we know that we're going to be spending funds on this. Does Corron give us strategically other options from a construction standpoint? I think everybody at this table knows my abhorrence to mobile units, right? What does this mean for us for Corron?
Amanda, you want to talk a little bit about from the construction site of Anderson, what Anderson really is about, and then Corron, that site from the construction, and then we'll answer your other questions.
Sure, absolutely. So from we'll touch a little bit more on the specifics of Corron and why it may be an advantageous route, but in terms of the construction, specifically, Corron does have a bit more space on the site already to be able to expand, and just the newer construction allows for, if we were to go down that route for an addition or something of that sort to support that building, the building is more advantageous than a site like Anderson, where we are more landlocked and already have some constraints on that site.
So we do think, yeah, when you think about our three newest buildings, a Corron, a Norton, and a Belgraham, what they offer are a significant number of auxiliary spaces and open spaces. Yesterday afternoon and into the evening, we had two sets of meetings, one with staff and one with parents revolving around access program. And one of the parents asked, he said, why is it that Norton Creek, with their programming, continues to remain steady and stable over years? And I was like, great question. Here's the answer. They have additional auxiliary space that allows the building to grow and breathe and be able to expand or contract and really do the things that they do. If you know those schools, they also have more flexible space, almost like in a pod situation where there are a number of classrooms, and then you have an open area where educators oftentimes, where I know Mr. White over at Norton Creek oftentimes holds a staff meeting in that space. It's so large. So they just have some different ability to be able to absorb student growth or programs or pieces like that. And it's really those three newer buildings, because at that time, you know, the vision for education was absolutely changing, and they were seeing this need for flexibility and growth in space. And as Jared indicated, the thoughtfulness around band and orchestra rooms that were absolutely pulled aside. So that's not something we have to dedicate it like we do at Anderson, where we have to say, we have to carve out a space here for this or that. So, Mr. Buxton, you know the elementary space configuration much better than I do.
I don't know if I do. That was great. Yeah, no, and the other thing with Corron, so we're really keeping an eye on it, because what current enrollment is and what the 5-year projections through RSP, it paints a little bit of a different picture. But what we're seeing with Corron currently is in 4th and 5th grade, massive grade levels, like over 100 kids. But then when you look at their kindergarten through 3rd, they're in the 60s or low 70s. And so when you think about those two bigger grade levels matriculating out, next year will be the last year where they will have the Strive program. So you do see after next year 2 additional classrooms potentially opening up. But the thing we always have to monitor is, you know, the turnover rate at Thornwood, because those grades of 68 kids or those grades of 72 kids, those could go up rapidly. But again, you see almost a 40 student difference between 4th and 5th grade and some of the other grade levels in the school.
We were originally supposed to be, I think, 103%, I think, this year.
Yeah, so in the 28-29 on the RSP's projections that they provided, in 28-29, they're supposed to be back up at 525 enrollment, which, yeah.
But I think what I'm hearing, kind of bottom line, is we do have classrooms that are opening there. The site gives us more flexibility from a building perspective, so that, you know, again, we know stability is super important for these kiddos, right? If we did need to, you know, do something with it, we have the footprint that we can expand there to support it. That's what I'm hearing.
As we look in it's a couple slides down, but if we look into our long-term location viability, that's why we continue to recommend a Corron, because of all the things that you said, the flexibility within the building, but everything that Amanda said allows us to build if we need, if the board said, yeah, we want to add on 2 to 3 classrooms here, so that no matter the influx of Thornwood, because that is a community that is 15 to 20 years old, so it's on the cusp of turning over again, from empty nesters to younger families moving in. So we see that's on that horizon, and that's what RSP saw as well. But I do think for long-term stability, that's something that the board will need to consider, you know, if that's the route we go. But if you're looking at a site to build, that is absolutely the right type of site to build on. All right, we're going to bring Mr. Attaway into the conversation. Oh, I apologize.
Over here, sorry, I'm kind of reiterating what was said, but As I look at this, obviously the constraints at Anderson for construction and for mobiles for that matter, which I am equally, if not more opposed to than Mr. Lentz. But even at Anderson, there's really the layout of the land. There's not really any place, as I'm looking at, there's no real layout there to put
Yeah,
anything on reasonably.
There's a bit of available land, if you will, that is still covered by a good growth of trees. But in terms of being able to connect to the existing footprint of the building in a smart and intelligent way that would provide a natural flow to the building, there's not an easy answer there. It would be definitely a unique, peninsula or offshoot of the building that would not make sense with some very big considerations. So thank you.
And I guess I would just, I would interject there too. I think, in my view, there's bigger priorities for Anderson in terms of they have no parking, really, for existing staff, parents, anyone that comes. Folks are parking on the street and all that type of thing. So if we were gonna do any construction, I guess I would say it would make more sense to fix the parking issue.
Yeah, and as part of the survey that we are doing here in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a better understanding of what we have the ability to do within that existing property at Anderson.
And I'm glad you're going to do it, because I'm going to argue for a while anyway, that Anderson, no matter what, whether access is there or not, needs more space. The same way with Richmond. So my biggest concern is, are we throwing stuff at the wall so we can get through it, or is this really a long-term, and you've done a great job. I have to say, this was really well done. I've been on the fence and leaning one way, and now I'm on the fence leaning the other way, but it's really critical that we don't make a decision that we regret and have to step back.
I'm sorry,
I had two more
Okay,
questions.
no,
There were two
then-
more little things. I'm wondering, and I think you talked about, if new fifth graders move in and we're phasing out, we can't really put them in the program.
No, so if a new fifth grader were to move in, we would work to find a seat within the program.
Okay, so they would still be able.
Yeah.
And then my biggest concern is what we heard about what happens in a move. And I know you've been talking about it, I assume you've talked through all of this, and I have to tell you that going to Anderson, I want to say Nate, but I should say, Mr. Chair. He was talking through the whole space. It was interesting to hear his thinking and how to figure it out. And we were in the room that is marked off and all of the things. And he's working really hard to keep kids out of the hallway, and has a great understanding of what the ML program is going to be, as well as access. The teachers were fabulous. Kids were great. Having a little guy in my family who goes there, and we talked about it at the dinner table, he was very sad to think that access might leave. So there's a community piece here that is critical. I have no doubt that Corron would be embracing, and we know that Chris is a fabulous principal as well, and all of those things, but it does change the climate, and it does require, we just talked about it earlier, what do our gen ed teachers need? And that's my bigger concern is, do we have enough time so that families will feel like they are embraced and warmed? And I know everybody will try, but it's a population that often doesn't easily become loved. Unfortunately, we want all kids to look a certain way, and it doesn't happen that way, and it requires a different kind of approach and skills. So that's my biggest concern, that we've built skills and climate in one building and now we're going to try to do it again.
I would say a characteristic of many of our learners is that big transitions like this are very hard. And again, back to kind of that IEP table with our families, when we notice that, we work really, really hard to support it. But it is a lot of work, both on the parent side as well as on the staff side. Nate did a fabulous job, Mr. Jarrett, sorry, of welcoming the program to Anderson, and we have a really wonderful kind of view of what that could look like for Corron, and I have no doubt that Ms. Blaskowitz would do that too. But it is hard for our learners.
So I was going to actually kind of pigtail on something you had said regarding the student set. Corron seems to give the best ability for us to have stability for this program in the long term. And I know I used the word permanent in the last meeting, and I think we sometimes get wrapped up in what people, the term permanent does not mean now and in forever and ever. It means permanent for these kids, that they're going to be in a program that's not going to move. I don't want them, the burden of them moving has it's been placed on their backs too many years. So I want, whatever we do, I'm going to reiterate that point, we need to find something that is going to be able to be long-term, that we're going to, for the longest term possible, we're not going to have to move in. Looking to the future, we're going to be able to do what we need to do in order to accommodate students in this population. I have no concerns, I have no qualms whatsoever about them being embraced by the students. I think that the kids in this district, I don't have any concerns about that. They're going to be embraced wherever they are. But I want them to be someplace where they can feel like they're at home and stay at home.
I appreciate that. And we'll get to that here in a few slides. I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Attaway on the IDEA funding and cost per student in the Access program. There we go.
Yeah, so this section isn't necessarily intended to be a costing of the options that we just walked through. That will come down the road as soon as we have a little more information about the site at Anderson and what options that gives us. This is more a conversation about, more generally, how do we pay for special education in this district, and what does that look like for our students? So the majority of special ed in this district, like most of our programs, is local funds. That's where the majority of our revenue comes from. But we do have two other sources of revenue that helps to pay for our special education programs, one of which is state reimbursements. Now, a few years ago, the list of state reimbursements that we got for special education was much longer. And then EBF came into effect, and that rolled and consolidated a lot of those special ed grants into EBF, which is great. It's stable. We know that it's what's coming year over year. The problem is, as our numbers fluctuate up and down, that also does not fluctuate up and down with us. There are additional state reimbursements that do still exist, but they don't cover a large portion of actual expenses for a couple reasons. One is that reimbursement program rules. For example, one of them, the district is only reimbursed for expenses in excess of double its per capita tuition charge, which for D303 is about $18,000. So anything under $36,000 we're not reimbursed for. Another is proration. Special education continues to be more expensive across the state. And with increasing district expenses also comes stagnant state allocations. So if Illinois is not putting more money towards special ed, the pie isn't getting any bigger, but we're trying to slice it up several different ways.
Can I clarify? Is
Absolutely.
that the direction at this time, that from what you're hearing and or seeing, that the state is not looking to put additional funding into our special education?
It seems as though the direction for the state of Illinois, and given this could change on an annual basis, but it seems that the direction of the state of Illinois right now is to continue to increase funding for EBF and then early childhood.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then the other avenue is federal grants, the largest of which is the IDEA grant, Individuals Disabilities Education Act. Now, when that came into inception in, I think it was 1974, it came in with the intention of funding about 40% of the average per pupil expenditure for special education nationwide. In practice, it has actually covered less than 15%. It never has come close to achieving that 40% mark. So just as an example, in District 303, our idea flow-through allocation is just over $2.5 million, but our budgeted special education expenses exceed $21 million. So it covers a very small portion of our full special ed expenses. And then similar to state reimbursements, federal grant funding is subject to annual budget negotiations and spending allocations. So there's no guarantee what's going to be allocated year over year, just similar to our state reimbursements. So we monitor that very closely. We try to read the tea leaves as much as we can. There's a lot in flux right now. We're trying to keep an eye on what's happening with our federal dollars. Just for context, federal revenue in this district accounts for about 2.4% of our revenue budget. So it is small, but it's still in the millions. We have a large budget, so 2.4% is still quite a bit. There are other federal grants that are smaller, but they're also more targeted for special ed. So IDEA Preschool is intended just to be for pre-K funding. IDEA Room and Board just covers the room and board portion of an out-of-state residential placement.
Question?
Yeah.
So the federal funds, they flow through to the state, and then the state disperses?
That's correct.
So does the state then have another criteria layer that they put on top of it to
They
determine?
don't, no. Their job is to monitor the use of the funds at the school district level based on the federal guidelines. So they're not doing necessarily an audit when they come in and look, they're more doing a monitoring visit on behalf of the federal government. And then, just for information, so these are just some average costs across several different placement options. So in the Access program at District 303, and this is personnel costs only, our per student cost right now is just over $40,000. Now, that is right this second when we pulled the numbers. So if the number of students change, that number obviously is going to fluctuate. But as of this date today, our per student cost is just over $40,000. If we were to enroll a student in the Mid-Valley New Pathways program, which is the primary program at Mid-Valley for students with autism, that would be a tuition rate of just over $61,000. Our average in-state private placement for roughly 175 days is about $70,000 on average. And then out-of-state private placement, which does include room and board, that's a large component of this number, is close to $170,000. Now, if we only look at the tuition portion of out-of-state, it actually is very similar to the in-state private placement. The room and board makes up a large portion of that. The other thing that I do want to mention is the in-state private placement rate assumes that the student does not need a one-to-one aide, which some of our students do. So if a student has a one-to-one aide in that placement, the cost is actually closer to about $100,000. Did I miss anything, Laurel? Okay.
No, I think that slide is a great example of our continuum of services, right? And why we've made the decisions that we've made as a district. Yeah.
Laurel, you want to talk to a little bit about our long-term strategy and what we're looking at in the
Yes,
future?
And I'm very appreciative of thinking about it from that perspective in terms of the decisions that the school district has made, because we do want to ensure that we can sustain the growth of our students who require that instructional level of services and access. But as we've talked about here, we have that challenge as well to make sure that we're continuing to grow the capacity of all of our educators to provide services for students who are impacted educationally by autism. And it really is a mutually beneficial quest for all of our students. So that's something that I think we embrace that challenge across the district, and we look forward to continuing to grow that and appreciate the support with your thoughts on that. We will want to make sure that we can take a long-term look and really use a committee process as we step into this next year to look at, okay, how would we go about coming to what would be as Mrs. Pratt referred to, a nice continuum where you would have kids who could stay in an elementary school from that kindergarten through 5th grade. Really honor some of that feedback that our parents have already given us, and also have a feedback loop in our committee process for parents to get some more information from them, and think about that long-term viability of locations in as Dr. Gordon said, more likely those newer buildings that we have where we've had that ability to look at those spaces differently and more flexibly. Criteria we would use is just thinking about that piece and then thinking about those title buildings or places where we do need to have TBE models so that we make sure that we're thinking about all of the additional staff that Mr. Buxton referred to bringing to us so that we can be successful for the long term.
I'm going to go back to one question that I don't know if we answered completely. Karen, talk to us about the K-5 continuum. Why, in your estimation, and it sounds like in our parents' estimation and our staff, why is that a good thing to have all within one school as opposed to K2 here, 3-5 there?
Absolutely. So as we kind of stated at the very start of our presentation, one of our goals is really building the most inclusive setting for each student. And for some students, that's opportunities in gen ed, as decided by the team, and for some students, that is our program. If we have that K-5 continuum available, we provide a more, an experience that really parallels our general education counterparts better. Currently within our program, we have students who have been, though maybe in multiple elementary schools, with the same teacher for 3, sometimes 4 years. We've done that intentionally because of all the changes and knowing that the change in location is very, very difficult for our students. We wanted to maintain that consistency of teacher. If we have the full K through 5 continuum, that allows us to have a section of K1 with one teacher. So consistency, again, is important. So you would have the same teacher for 2 years. 2nd through 3rd grade, same teacher. 4th and 5th grade, same teacher. And that's more mirrored onto what a traditional K through 5 experience looks like in general education, while also honoring that consistency is important to our students. So within our program and based on parent feedback and of course our teachers' feedback, that K through 5 with allowing teacher changes but not building changes really supports our ultimate goal of providing those inclusive opportunities for our students.
Karen, thank you for that. Board, I'd hand it over to you for any other questions. I know we were asking questions along the way, so if you have anything else.
I do. So we've talked about access, and it's really focused on K through 5. Can we talk about if these children needs, how they manifest in early childhood?
I will jump in on this, and we fortunately do have Jennifer Mersu, who is our early childhood director, here this evening as well. She is very passionate about this, and it's been really important to us, and Dr. Gordon has really been right there with us to encourage that we're always thinking about all of our classrooms are set up to be blended classrooms, meaning we have 3-, 4-, and 5-year-olds in all of our classes. And we have we have students who are more typically developing, our community preschool, along with students who have IEPs. And as well, we have our students who are there with our Preschool for All grant. So we make sure that within each classroom environment that creates this really rich opportunity for kids to be learning from each other and for our teachers to be setting up those language-rich environments and just helping to build skills for all of our little ones. But simultaneously, we have instructional level classrooms within that, so there's a smaller number of students and a classroom that doesn't mirror exactly, because we're looking at those younger developmental ages and stages, so it doesn't mirror exactly those criteria that we just talked about for access, but it has some similarities to help build those skills. And one of the things that Jennifer would tell you is that the conversations, and I've been involved in some with staff, to continue to look at, and who have even come to our training for STAR for our students who are in access, and they just embrace it and say, we will help for those students who are in instructional settings to learn and to be able to be in blended settings excuse me, I didn't mean to say blended, in those less structured settings with more students before they go to kindergarten where we can. So it's a constant piece in early childhood, and it's really wonderful. We see the enthusiasm all the time and success. So.
Thank you for that. The only feedback I would provide as you're thinking about this slide with the long-term strategy is there really, to me, should be a bullet on there that shows that you're considering the linkages and being intentional about however the access strategy looks, and then how does that impact early childhood and vice versa, right? It should be
Thank
a
you.
two-way to me.
I love it.
Yeah, I totally
you.
agree.
And to tag on to that, it was nice to hear what you're doing at the middle school, because that was something that we had talked, Heidi and I had talked about it walking in, was what happens at middle school. So if that becomes something more that we need to consider, and then the kids are going into high school as well. So that, I was glad you talked about that.
I was actually going to ask a little bit about that as well. As we see these cohorts, start to move up, have we started thinking about the supports, like more of like from a classroom need and space need at a middle school level? Because I know at a middle school level, we're very, very, very tight as well. So that's where, like, I'd love to hear about that need, because that's something that is coming quickly as well.
Yes, so our middle school level of programming is one classroom currently. The space needs from the slide regarding what inside a classroom looks like is a little bit different. For example, well, in Thompson specifically, the sensory space is very close to the classroom, so we were able to not have both, if that makes sense, like dedicated space. So there are still those strategies, but the proximity is really helpful. So the classroom, as the students get older, shifts a little bit to more of that whole group and small group space from kind of all the ones that were on that slide. But it is still, in terms of the classroom, it is important to have more space there as well.
That would be my ask, is let's think through that again from a longer term perspective, because again, this, we've been, I think I heard in citizen comments, pulling a rabbit out of our hat, right? In this process. And again, I really appreciate the presentation and the deliberative nature of which we're going about trying to solve this, right? And acknowledging where we're at with our, the constraints that we have. So that would be something, as we start to talk more about the middle school piece, like where's that at? The second thing, which is completely unrelated, but I know it was something that I asked a while ago. We had an exercise going about lighting, and I know we had some analysis. I thought we had some analysis. I forget whether the consulting firm or whomever coming to give us feedback about lighting. Don't have to answer it now where we're at with it, but that was one of the things when I went through the access classrooms as well. The natural lighting is it's super important for all of our classrooms, right? But that was something that even more so than the other classrooms, the access classrooms, I don't know if you guys saw this as well, they all have the covers over the lights and everything else. So that's something that as we're updating buildings and everything else, I want to be very, deliberate with that as well.
Thank you.
I can give just a little bit on that, just a little teaser. So that was specifically looking at ComEd incentives rebates to do LED retrofits in our school, and specifically we looked at Norton Creek, Corron, and Adjournment because of the ComEd serving nature of that. And part of that, we did look at fixtures that included daylight harvesting, so it was able to adjust appropriately into the different light levels needed within those rooms. And features nowadays do allow us to have different dimming or just different lighting level capabilities to be able to accommodate the needs of specific classrooms or offices.
And to tie to that, the one thing that was kind of a bummer was that the lounge in Anderson has no windows. And if it becomes a classroom, it'll be, I think, the only one without windows. If we were to go with the, everybody moving to Corron, what could we do to help support that transition? Are there resources that we could do for 1-2 years, something that would help make that transition easier for both kids and teachers? If that's something that we should address, I think that would.
We can talk about it briefly here, but we can also bring it back on the whichever. Yeah, we'll bring that back on the 14th. All right. I also want to highlight our parents and our staff who joined us last night. Our staff came right around 4:15, mainly from the Access program. We presented a condensed version of this, but pretty much this version. We had a really good question-answer session with both groups. Overall, if I were to be able to gauge their feedback to us, was they like the option 2, the phase out, even with the compromises that were there with both our staff and our families. I just appreciated our staff and our families coming out. Last night was crazy weather around here, but people still made that a priority to come out and spend a significant portion of their evenings with us. Incredibly respectful, great conversation. We actually had a few people join us via Zoom as well, so that we were trying to make it be able to join us in whatever manner you possibly could. So I just wanted to give a shout out to both those groups for participating with us.
Dr. Gordon,
As I transition,
Dr. Gordon,
I apologize.
Would I also be able to give a shout out to the Anderson staff who provided daycare or child care in supervision during the parent meeting as well? I thought that was fantastic.
And as I'm thinking about it, giving a huge shout out to our principals who've been here and been working with us. Chris and Nate have been side by side as we've been trying to go through this entire process and really thinking about this work from a building lens, from each of their buildings. How does this look? How does this feel? They've been phenomenal partners throughout this entire process. And we've had a large group of other humans within D303 who've been participating. Again, you'll hear us continuously say this: together we're better. We continue to open up our table and invite more and more people to our table, so we have different perspectives, different thoughts on how best to solve some of these wicked problems that come to us, not our students, but our facility problems that face us, and that has been an issue. And as we looked into those long-term strategies, it is why we feel like it's really an important piece around our elementary schools to have significant classrooms, auxiliary space, but also this really important piece around no Title I and no TBE status in either one of those schools, because of what Mr. Buxton said earlier around the significant number of staff who come with those programs. So it's really important for us, as we're thinking long-term, as each of you have talked about, that we're taking that into consideration as well. That we know those pieces. But our facilities are currently not growing. But as Mr. Buxton also said, interesting enough, our elementary numbers are at the highest level since 2012, 2013. So it continues to occur, and we've got to figure out the best possible pathway forward. So what I'm proposing to the board, that we bring this to the April 14th board meeting with more discussion, potential action, setting up very similar to how we had the conversation around multilingual, with discussion and potential action. If the board's not comfortable on the 14th, we can hold off on that action on that night, but structuring it very similarly to what we did with the multilingual decision of that night, if the board's comfortable with that.
As part of that discussion, would there also be at least the straw man of how the long-term strategy is going to be plotted out?
100%. Yes, we will dive a little bit deeper into our long-term strategy. We'll make sure we have the questions that were asked here answered, the transition plan, what that would look like if, so we can look at option 3. What is that professional learning? What does that transition piece look like for students, staff, and families? Okay, I'll hand it back to you. I know.
We
You
still
got
have
a little bit
agenda
more work.
items.
I am going to say goodnight to all of my, our principals, our directors, anybody associated with learning teaching. Thank you, everybody. That was learning teaching, Conlon. Learning teaching.
We need a quick 5-minute recess here?
Yes.
While we clear the room and
It'll be just us.
we'll take a quick 5-minute recess.
So Mid-Valley continues to report that revenues are trending higher than the prior year, while expenditures are trending very close to the prior year, and there are no areas of concern at this time.
I normally just keep my mic on for these. Let's go to the D303 financial report.
Both revenue and expenditures are trending slightly ahead of the prior year, but there continue to be no areas of concern at this time.
Okay. All right, we're going to move on to item D, our athletic trainer recommendation.
So prior to this current school year, District 303 contracted all of the athletic training services for both high schools. Then in spring of 2024, the board gave administration authorization to hire 3 athletic trainers as employees in lieu of continuing to outsource these services. As we've had conversations ongoing with our athletic directors, there's been some concern about the availability of the athletic directors for some after-hours work, weekends, and then the workload that they were taking on because of all those additional. So we did go from 4 athletic trainers that we were outsourcing down to 3 employed, and they're feeling that pinch. So we issued a bid to outsource some or all of the athletic training services again moving forward. And we received some interesting bids back, and the one that intrigued us the most was from Northwestern Medicine, who bid on giving us 2 athletic trainers if we continue to employ 2 athletic trainers. So the model that we're actually recommending is to continue to employ 2 athletic trainers, so 1 at each high school, and then outsource 2 athletic trainers, again, 1 at each high school. This is a model that's similar to what Northwestern is currently doing at Naperville 203 and District 200 in Wheaton. And when we cost everything out, so the total base cost of salaries and benefits for our 3 athletic trainers this year is close to $304,000, not including base salary increases for next year because we don't know what those are yet. But if we just inserted the 2 outsourced athletic trainers into that model, we would be paying $307,000. So essentially a $4,000 increase on our current costs for an additional FTE in athletic trainers. So we're recommending that the board approve a contract with Northwestern Medicine for 2 athletic trainers as the lowest responsive bidder for this bid.
Is this still below that previous when they over doubled our contract for the 1 year, right?
So we're higher than what we were paying then, but ATI did submit a bid and it continues to go up. Yeah, Northwestern has given us the most competitive bid of all of the 3 bids that we received.
Yeah, we anticipated that it was going to grow, but okay.
And I just wondered, does it mean riffing or any of the, everything?
So because we employ 3 athletic trainers now, we would only be maintaining 2 as employees, and it's based on seniority. So Northwestern has let me know, and we're communicating that to the athletic trainer that would not be employed by District 303 anymore, that Northwestern is more than happy to hire them on, so they can continue to work in our district. They would just be Northwestern employees instead of District 303 employees.
Let's move this to consent. Okay. Let's move on to our next item, which is the Wredling Middle School modification.
Sure, so the Wredling Middle School field modification is due to a change in the field that was due to the running track that was installed around the football field in 2022. Upon correcting the angle and pitch of that track, we then created a condition that we had a severe drop-off at the end of our football field, making it unplayable. So I've been working alongside Wold Architects and Engineers and FH Passion to come up with a plan to regrade a portion of that field to allow for playability. So we received a proposal just over $220,000 to regrade and properly pitch that field to allow for playability. And then it would, we anticipate the work would start this spring. And although we do have to have time for that new seed to take root, we do anticipate playability next spring.
Was this something we knew was going to happen when we did the track?
You know, I'm unsure of all the details. This was prior to my time with the district, but it was a condition that was identified once once the track was identified as off pitch. When they fixed that, it became very apparent.
Do we have this? We have this one in the budget, right?
Yes, we do. This one was reflected in the capital plan.
Consent?
Yeah, so the Corron Elementary parking lot replacement was planned for and budgeted in our capital improvement plan for fiscal year 25-26. Similar to our project last year at Pearson Creek, we engaged with Bear Construction through a job order contract through the TIPS purchasing agreement. So we worked alongside Bear and their subcontractors that we also work with personally in this district. We put together a really comprehensive, good team to complete this work. We evaluated several different options in terms of a base bid for the main parking lot, as well as explored some options of approving the bus lot since we are on site. The recommendation that comes to you today indicates a not to exceed cost of $510,000. Since we did post this, we have honed in on those prices, and we are anticipating it to be closer to a $400,000. So we're really happy with the pricing that is coming in for this project.
Okay. I think this can go to consent as well. All right, moving on, Wasco partial roof replacement.
Okay, so in fall 2023, we did engage with a roofing contractor to help understand the condition of several of our more aging roofs. As part of that, Wasco was prioritized as a need to replace in the upcoming years. And specifically, we do have a section of that roof that has continued to have water issues, even with some repairs attempted in that spot. And so we have prioritized a replacement of a portion of the roof at Wasco for a replacement this summer. But because we knew that there are many other areas at that building with roof sections that are 20-plus years already, we looked at replacing an even larger section. So we received pricing from Garland, and the beauty of the purchasing or going in a contract with Garland is that it's a co-op program, and we receive specialized pricing on the material itself, but then we do a traditional bid process with local vendors, so we were able to get multiple pricing for local vendors to see where that comes in. So the base bid came in just over $300,000, and the alternate number one, which is a substantial amount of square footage, came in about $820,000. We are recommending award for the base bid and the alternate for over 46,000 square foot. And really the idea between awarding both of these scopes right now for the summer is we do take advantage of the economy of scale, having the management on site, the tools and resources on site, and looking at just that cost per square foot difference. It was a substantial saving to knocking out more of those roofs this summer.
Move this to consent. Okay, multi-site security improvement phase 2.
So as you may know, last summer, we completed the phase 1 of our multi-site security improvement, which provides access control to our door entry systems throughout the schools. We completed middle schools, high schools, and a handful of other buildings last summer. This summer, we are working on the elementary schools. So I worked alongside Wold Architects and Engineers to continue to put together the scope for this summer, similar to phase 1. The difference between this summer and last summer is that the packages, we broke out this bid into 2 different packages. We isolated more of the electronical and technological portion of the access control project separate from the door hardware. So you may notice that we have 2 items on this on our agenda today for this project. And the intent is that this first recommendation is to award to Video and Sound Services directly for the access control portion of this phase, and we are doing this through a specific Illinois school code that allows us, that exempts us from the normal bidding process due to the nature of it and our previous experience with this vendor. So we're recommending approving this bid for the access control portion to Video and Sound in the amount of $523.
Any questions on this one? Let's move this one to consent as well. On to our next multi-site security improvement for the door hardware.
Yeah, so this is the door hardware package. Again, we did put this portion out for a traditional bidding process. So it was put on the street and all contractors were able to respond and provide pricing. We did receive 3 bids for the work, and coincidentally, Video and Sound was the lowest bidder for the door hardware portion. Again, Video Sound was the contractor who was awarded low bid last summer, and we had great experience with their team on site. So we are recommending award for the hardware package to Video and Sound in the amount of $499.
To consent? All right. We're flying through it. I like it. We're going to go to GSF renewal for school year 25-26.
So the district is concluding our 7th year of contractual nighttime custodial services with GSF. We've continued to have a great partnership with them, and they provide excellent service. They are continuing to be really responsive to the needs and the ever-changing needs of our buildings. And they help support us with the various moves and other intricate features of our summer planning. So they have been a great partner, and we are looking to renew a 1-year renewal of our contract with them with an increase of 3%, which is just really aligned with the CPI increase over the past year. So we're recommending awarding that 1-year renewal and just over $3.7 million with GSF.
Any questions on this one? When was the last time that we went out to bid on this?
It was 7 years ago.
7 years ago? Okay. And we normally do annual contracts with them?
With GSF,
Yeah.
yeah. We have not had a multi-year contract with them for some time.
Okay. All right. Consent. On to East High School door replacement.
Door 88 and 89 at East High School is a 2-level entry system with a ramp going up and then ramping going down. Well, it's not a main entrance to our building. It does serve as the primary entrance for our RISE program and those students, and it does serve as a primary egress from the building. We have seen some substantial issues with the door system itself, with some foundation or structural settling occurred over years that has prohibiting the door from functioning properly. My staff has done a wonderful job making it continue in operation, shaving down the doors and things as necessary, but we've just identified more of a structural issue that is causing this condition. Furthermore, the ramp system itself has continued to see many signs of aging with the existing concrete, painting finishes, and things like that. So included in our capital plan was funds to revamp this area and provide a new door system and improvements to the ramp system to extend its life. A project is going out to bid here shortly for the entire scope of this project. However, one of our long lead time items was the door system itself. So this recommendation here is the advanced purchase of the door replacement for the lower level at East High School in the amount of $32,930. And this is just for material only to get that order started on that door.
Consent? All right, last one, natural gas RFQ.
So the district regularly puts together requests for our current agreement for natural gas expires in April 2026, but we were contacted by Nania Energy Advisors, who is our energy consultant, to tell us that there is currently favorable pricing extending beyond the end of the contract. So we're requesting from the board approval to engage in the RFQ process for natural gas and then accept a contract that is deemed to be advantageous for the district based on market conditions. We've had to do this a couple times in the past. Every time we've gone out to do this, because utilities prices change on a daily basis, part of this authorization would be for the chief operating officer to actually sign the contract documents on the day, and then we would present the contract at the next regular board meeting.
Brings us to item 3, adjournment. I'll open it up for any future agenda items that we may have. No?
So we'll have a couple items that I know are going to be coming to April's meeting. This is typically where we'll talk about the school nutrition programs for next year, the pricing associated with those. I think we need to update our contract request at high schools for next year. We'll also be bringing the designation of depositories. We'll talk about the 5-year capital improvement plan, and then with the multilingual program approval, there are some expenses that need to occur in the current fiscal year to get teachers ready to start the program in the fall. So Melissa and I are looking at whether or not we need to do an amended budget to make sure that those expenses are covered in our current year's budget. If we do, the amended budget will appear at the April Business Services meeting.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to call us to adjournment at 7:47 PM.